Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm Scott Graffius, and this is But First the Team. And I did want to mention up front that for content accessibility reasons, this presentation uses deliberately large size fonts and high contrast components, including a lot of very vibrant, colorful visuals. And I will be describing the on-screen content. In cases where there's only a few words on the screen, I'll probably read them word for word, but for most of the presentation, that won't be the case. So getting started, want great cloud or web development projects? Who doesn't? Among other things, it takes a great team. And here comes Bruce Tuckman's phases of team development. That's my segue in. It's a model that stood the test of time because it remains highly relevant and beneficial. So if you're a leader or you want to be one, a member of a team, or maybe in one in the future, or just looking to develop your skills, this talk, which is based on Tuckman's model, but with a fresh angle, and that is 0% theory, 100% practical information that you can use. We'll give you a framework for actionable tips for working in and leading teams successfully. So whether you're a member of a team or you're leading a team internally or externally, this is for you. And the objectives are, after completing this discussion, you should understand the 5 phases of team development, the characteristics of each phase, and most importantly, usable strategies for effectively navigating all the phases from beginning to end, from setup to the after party. And so here's how I structured this discussion, the agenda. Introduction, objectives, and agenda. Well, we're almost done with that one. About, a few slides about me, to introduce myself more properly. And then the majority of the talk is this section here, of course, the 5 phases of team development relating to, but first, the team. And then there's a quick wrap up with a conclusion and a bibliography. If anyone's interested in learning more on the subject, I have some recommended sources that you might want to take a look at. A takeaway, and then a wrap up. And in the wrap up, it's Q&A and thank you. And I wanted to mention at this point that in order to really focus and deliver the content to you, I won't be doing chat while I'm talking, but if you have questions, you can use the chat functionality to enter them in as they occur, or you can wait until the end to use chat. So at the end of the presentation, I'll go into the chat function and I'll look at the questions, probably taking them in order if I'm able to scroll, up that far, and then answer the questions there. So I wanted to let you know how I'm going to be handling Q&A. My projection is that we'll have 5 to 10 minutes remaining to handle Q&A. So here's about. My company is Exceptional PPM and PMO Solutions, and I realize that those acronyms, those initials may not mean something to everyone, so I'll spell them out. It represents Project Portfolio Management and Project Management Office, but nowadays it's really an all-encompassing umbrella. So we're talking about project, program, portfolio, portfolio, that's a big one. Project Management Office, Agile, hybrid, traditional project management, and everything in between. So that's really what that represents. And so what my company does is we help client organizations strengthen their project management capabilities so that they can best realize their objectives. Every engagement's unique, but typically we're talking about faster time to market, higher satisfaction, meeting the dates, coming in on or under budget for projects not agile, for agile having more consistency. The list goes on, just to give you a sense of what I do through Exceptional PPM and PMO Solutions. And quite confident in what we deliver, that there's a delighted client guarantee, trademark. And so that's me. So a little bit about myself for a proper introduction. I'm the founder and CEO of Exceptional PPM and PMO Solutions, and I'm an agile project management consultant, practitioner, author, and speaker. And I'm quite honored that content from my books and my talks and other things I've published have been used by a variety of different media outlets, publications, businesses, governments, universities. And just a few examples include, I won't call them all out, but um, Yahoo Finance, Techstars, Computer Weekly, the United States Department of Energy, Gartner, Cisco, Ford, uh, Tufts University, Texas A&M, and the New Zealand government, to name a few. And I have 7 professional credentials, and just describing what's on screen here, the first 4 relate directly to Agile, and then it's followed by Project Management Professional, ITIL, and Green Belt in Lean Six Sigma. So those are my professional credentials. But I think more relevant here beyond that is, where I've worked, the kinds of businesses, sectors, or industries I've worked over the years. And it's quite diverse. When you put it all on the screen here, you can see, and I will list these off here very quickly. Advanced tech, which really relates to R&D. So I'll cover those 2 in one point. Consumer products, e-commerce, retail, entertainment, government, media, technology, including services, and telecom. Those are the kinds of businesses I've worked in. So that's my background. And here we are into the main section of this talk, which is the 5 phases of team development. Before jumping into the detail, it would probably be more helpful to give you context. So that's how I designed this presentation. A few slides on that first. So Bruce Tuckman, who's a psychologist who graduated from Princeton, conducted extensive research on team dynamics, also known as group dynamics, also known as team development, also known as group development, and some other labels. Those terms are used interchangeably by many people, including myself. Anyways, he conducted research on that, and he published a groundbreaking model in 1965. And you might say, well, that was a long time ago, because it was a long time ago, and you'd be right. But that model remains highly relevant and beneficial today. And I'm going to give you just a few very specific examples of how that's the case. So even if you haven't heard of the model, maybe you have heard of the model. As we go through it, maybe some of this will be familiar, maybe it won't. But the presentation here draws on my own firsthand real-world experience using Tuckman's model, and also with the guidance that I'm showing in this presentation, supported by many additional sources. So I'm not going to go back to when this was first introduced in 1965. I could, but I thought it would be more helpful for you to see how it's relevant today by showing you a few examples of how that's the case. So, and that would be just to list a few of them: Fast Company, the IEEE, MIT, Inc. Magazine, Scrum Alliance, and many others have written publications touting the virtues, because there's benefit here, of Tuckman's model. The thing that this presentation does, and I'm really repeating myself from earlier, but it's probably beneficial to do so, is as close to 0% theory as possible and 100% practical, actionable, usable information. That's what really sets this presentation apart. Anyways, moving on to further reinforce the model's continuing relevance and value, the diverse sources that I just showed you a moment ago, Harvard Business Review, MIT, IEEE, etc., were all published recently. And by that I mean not back in 1965, in the last 10 years, and many of them in the last 5. I'm sure if you Google Tuckman's model or some of the details that you'll see in the next few minutes, there will be many, many more. I just kind of did a deliberate, diverse representation that I thought might be helpful for you to get that context. So in looking at models, many things I've read on models, including the Tuckman model, they seem unnecessarily complicated. I, um, it might be just me, but I think that for things for things that are potentially complicated, you need to make an extraordinarily special effort to distill them down to things that are real world specific, practical, and usable. And so that's what I've done. So practical examples, which are backed up by some interesting applicable visuals, are helpful generally. And I think in this case, tremendously. Um, you'll be the judge of it, of course. So in the coming slides, this is what I'll be showing you is practical examples and some visuals that relate to it. So in terms of visuals and content, you know, in deliberating exactly the design of this presentation, I thought about what I like and what you may or may not like. I don't know. I can't speak for everybody, but at least for this subject matter, clip art just doesn't work for me. So no clip art. Stock photos, again, for this presentation, nothing wrong with stock photos. No stock photos. And definitely no generic content. Everything here is custom content for you in terms of the material that relates to what you'll see in the subsequent slides. So here is a high-level overview of the phases of team development, which is a custom visual that I created, which gives you, again, a high-level overview. Now, at this view, I realize you can't make out all the detail, but we'll be covering the detail in the next few minutes. So this is just to kind of give you a bird's eye view of what the phases of team development, again, some people might call it team dynamics or group dynamics, but what the phases of team development looks like. What I would like to do is describe it just a little bit before moving on. So below the graph, there's a table. And then the table, there's 5 columns. And from left to right, it's forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. Those are the 5 phases. And the first row under the headers is characteristics. So these are the things that how the team is behaving or what's going on otherwise during the phase. So to kind of help you define or diagnose what phase the team is in. Very specific examples, which we'll go into in a moment. And then below that, the next row is strategies. Things that somebody can do, you or somebody else, and by somebody else, it could be somebody within the team. It really will vary by organization, right, and the team or the project. It doesn't have to be a project team, but I'm going to use that example quite a bit because it's most of my background, not all of it, but most of it. So the thing about Tuckman's model, before I go on, also is that it's universal. It's applicable to all kinds of teams and projects and programs and industries and sectors and the like. And also, it's worth commenting early on here before we get into the detail that Tuckman says that it's inevitable, and the research validates this, by the way, it's inevitable that teams will go through these phases and that doing so is normal and healthy and expected. So even though there's a phase called storming, which we haven't covered yet, which sounds ominous and scary, maybe not, it's very normal and expected that team will go through it. So these are the 5 phases of team development. And one more thing before we get into the detail is I wanted a visual. So this is just that was a visual of sort of a lot of text, some graphs, a graph and a lot of text, right? But I also wanted a visual for a team because teams are all about people. But I wanted to make this as light and as fun as possible as well. Again, I can only write for myself. I don't know what works for you. I can't write for every individual, but I wanted to make this light and entertaining. So what I did was I thought, well, Tuckman's model was created and introduced in 1965. What character or characters, because this is a team, right? So it's multiple characters, were created on or about 1965. And I found that there is a beloved cartoon characters that were created in 1969, just 4 years after Tuckman's models was introduced. And so here's the visual, which is custom, of the team that will be employed in the following slides, along with other information. There you go. That's the gang representing the team for fun. So now, each of the 5 phases in detail. So on screen here is the phases of team development visual, describing what's on screen here again. And there's a yellow rectangle flashing around the forming stage to identify that that's the one we're talking about right now. And for each of the phases, going back one slide, for each of the phases, we'll be going into the characteristics and the strategies for each of the 5 phases and giving you the examples that are listed and adding some additional content as well. So moving on, here's a visual of forming. These labels are, for most people, or for many people, are sort of self-explanatory to an extent. So forming is this team who maybe has worked together before, maybe they haven't, but this team, or a mix. This team is assembled for some purpose, typically to produce a product or a service or an improvement or some other deliverable or collection of deliverables, right? So this is a visual that just supports forming, the very first phase of the 5 phases. So looking at forming, here are the characteristics of what's happening, what's going on during the forming stage. This is new, right? The team is getting together for something new. There's typically some excitement and eagerness about what's going on. They're talking to each other, they're getting to know each other, they're socializing. In terms of tone, generally people are polite, sticking to safe topics, but at this early stage, it's perfectly normal to not have all the details or all the details that they would like to have. And so they're unclear about exactly what's going on and how they personally fit in. There's a lot of questions. Very normal, very typical. But here are things that can be done, strategies, to help the team grow and advance on to the next phase. This is a time for somebody, again, it can be somebody within the team, it depends on the culture of the company. I'll give you a few examples. It could be a team lead, it could be a scrum master, it could be a project manager, it could be an executive sponsor, it could be a departmental manager. Whoever this person is, it will vary by company. Whoever it is that can help facilitate the team is in their progress and their advancement through the phases. They're taking the lead, right? They're making themselves highly visible. And to the earlier point about socializing going on, it can't hurt to facilitate introductions, especially if this team or some members of the team haven't worked together before. And some folks like to do icebreakers. Some folks, you don't have to. There's a lot of different ways to do introduction. Just go around the table and introduce yourself virtually or in person, depending on how things are with regards to the health environment. I'll leave it at that. And then also what's quite helpful in terms of strategies is providing a big picture. The detailed picture may not be available at this early stage, and that's very normal. But maybe somebody can paint the big picture about the vision or the mission or the objectives of why we're getting together to do this new product, service, improvement, or whatever it is. Maybe not. It has to do with increasing revenue or growing market share or research and development, new product launch, whatever it is, right? Giving the big picture about this endeavor that the team has been assembled to work on. Giving very clear expectations. So I'll just give a few examples. They may not apply in your case, but just to give you a sense of what I'm referring to. Clear expectations are, the team's going to get together every Tuesday at 1 o'clock for an hour to go through the details of the status. Or perhaps in a more agile environment, you don't have to be agile to do it, but in an agile environment, maybe there's what's called a daily stand-up, where the team gets together at say 10 o'clock a.m. for 15 minutes every workday, and each team member for 1, 2, or 3 minutes or so describes very briefly, what they have worked on since the last meeting, what they'll be working on next, and any kinds of issues or impediments that are really getting in the way of getting work done. And those are just two examples. There's many. So communicating success criteria, again, at this very early stage, this relates to the big picture. Maybe the details aren't known, but if there is some sort of a top-down driver, this is definitely a time to share it. For example, in some organizations, well, this thing needs to be done by the end of Q3, or this thing needs to be done within 2 weeks, or whatever the case may be. Just two examples for you. And ensuring that response times are quick. So when people have questions or there's some deliverables, to making sure that they're expedited and that there's a very quick resolution of any kinds of items that are outstanding during this forming stage or phase, if you will. So next up is storming. We have the visual phases of team development, and with storming, with a flashing yellow rectangle around it, identifying that that's where we are. The second phase here, and again, these are all normal, healthy, Bruce Tuckman and others would say inevitable phases people go through. So after forming, they're storming, and that's the visual of the team. And I'll describe the traditional, or the typical rather, characteristics of the team during storming. So it's very normal that there's some level of resistance, believe it or not. Everybody doesn't have to exhibit it, but it does occur during this phase in many cases. Sometimes there's even a sort of a lack of participation and conflict. I mean, we're talking about different feelings, different opinions. Sometimes there's even like a jockeying for position. So it may be formal or informal, like somebody wants to take the lead, again, formally or informally within this team, or prove themselves. So they're trying to make it known what their role is going to be, that they're going to be the person that's in charge. And high emotions, at least relative to other phases, high emotions are not unusual during storming. Again, the label is storming, so that says a lot. And then when you start to get hints, this is a hint that the team is starting to move out of storming and into norming, is they start to move towards group norms. So the things I just described start to quiet down, and the team starts to move into establishing norms in terms of how they behave and work together. So that brings us to the strategies, what you can do or somebody can do in the organization to help the team grow and advance. The first thing is requesting feedback. And what I mean by that is requesting it verbally or in writing or both, and meaning it in terms of body language and also tone, asking for feedback, maybe even saying you expect feedback, right? And encouraging it, meaning it's not just a one-off request. You make a request and you go away and it's never asked for again. It's very important during the storming phase to strongly encourage feedback, and that really helps you with point number 2, is identifying what the issues are. It may be obvious what they are, it may not be, but by encouraging feedback and getting feedback, it'll help uncover issues and then the facilitation of the resolution of the issues. The team is normalizing matters. This is why I had kind of touched on that a moment ago, but they're starting to normalize matters. So helping them normalize matters, I said that 3 times, I think. Well, it's worth it. And then building trust by honoring commitments. So by honoring commitments, you're building trust, and I said that twice, but here's an example. If the team has been told, for example, in the forming stage, I gave an example of, well, the team's going to get together every workday for 15 minutes and do an update, sometimes referred to as a stand-up meeting. But what really happens is, well, I'm talking about a pattern. Well, 3 of them got canceled in a row, and then the next week, 4 of them got canceled. You see, that's not honoring commitments. So if people need to be very clear about expectations earlier on, and in this phase, honoring them. It goes a real long ways to developing trust and moving into norming, which is the next phase. So the visual of phases of team development on screen, norming is has a yellow rectangle flashing on it, and here is a visual of the team, very different from the prior visual, almost like a mini hierarchy going on here with the team. And the characteristics are the team is starting to develop cohesion. That's the last bullet point, but it really speaks to the visual there during the norming phase. But the other points are the team's goals and purpose are well understood, and that really enables and supports and is a catalyst for people being more confident and committed to the endeavor that they're working on. Typically, team members during norming, especially compared with forming and storming earlier, are more engaged and supportive of one another. It's very normal for people to be anxious during storming or maybe even forming. So during this phase, there is relief and lowered anxiety. And it bears repeating, the team is starting to develop cohesion. But here's what you can do to help the team move forward from norming into performing the next phase. It's recognizing efforts, both at the individual and the team level, providing learning opportunities. And I'm really talking about things that directly relate to the work that the team is doing on the endeavor versus some side project, if you will. And feedback. Feedback is really consistent throughout, but it bears being listed here. Delegating freely within the team to the extent it makes sense, as applicable. And then monitoring the energy of the team. Now, this one, I admit, is more subjective than some of the other examples, but the team has gone from forming to storming. We're now in norming, about to move to performing. And so this is not a time for micromanaging the team. It's more to monitor the energy of the team, especially on the off chance, it's very rare, but of the team reverting to an earlier phase. Once we get through all 5 phases, we'll be doing 4 and 5 in just a moment. And I can give you 1 or 2 examples of how that might occur and how it can be corrected. So those are the strategies for helping the team grow and advance for norming. Now we have the visual of phases of team development with performing, the 4th phase with the yellow rectangle flashing on it. And here's a different visual of the team, very different from the 4 prior visuals, kind of depicting their relationship and their communication channels with one another. So this is really speaks to I'm going to jump to the 4th bullet point for a moment, this visual that the team is starting to demonstrate interdependence and self-management. These things are hallmarks of an agile team. And it's certainly beneficial for other teams as well, but I did want to mention agile. So jumping to the first bullet point, though, for the characteristics of the team, high motivation, trust, and empathy is quite common during the performing phase. And the individuals will often be deferring to the greater team needs versus individual needs. They're consistently performing. And I'll repeat this, the demonstrations of interdependence, self-management, it's a real biggie. And effectively producing deliverables related to consistent performance, already mentioned, and establishing a level of balance between task and process. That's really, to phrase that differently, we're really talking about the balance between the big picture and the detail work that's being done, making sure that both people are mindful of both. So here are the strategies to help the team grow and advance. So performing is the 4th phase. It's the highest level of performance, performing is. So the role here is minimal intervention. Guide from the side or guiding from the side, so I love that term, is really appropriate here. Micromanaging, even more so than in the prior phase, definitely not, does not make sense, will actually be counterproductive. So celebrating, incremental successes or project milestones, if this is a project team, can be quite helpful during the performing phase to keep the performance continuing and the motivation high, and encouraging the team to be, provide collective decision making and problem solving. Odds are they already are, but even if they already are doing that, it should be reinforced and supported and encouraged that they continue doing so. So these are the strategies for helping a team grow and advance. So the fifth and last phase of team development is adjourning, and the yellow rectangle flashing on that on the visual. That brings us to, here's the team. So adjourning is when the team has fulfilled the objectives that they were, the reason for them coming together. Again, it could be a product, a service, an improvement, whatever the reason for them being assembled has been fulfilled at this point. So I do want to mention that in 1965, Bruce Tuckman introduced the phases of team development. It was just 4 phases. It was forming, storming, norming, and performing. So if you were to, I'm not saying you should do this, but if you were to Google Bruce Tuckman or those phases, I mean, you can, you'll have a lot of results, first of all, which is a good thing. And second of all, a good portion of them will talk about 4 phases. They're not wrong, but they're not entirely, it's not entirely complete or accurate. And what I mean by that is in 1977, years after Dr. Tuckman introduced his model, he decided to amend it by including the adjourning phase. And because Bruce Tuckman himself amended his own model, I and most people consider the model to have 5 phases, not 4. So I just wanted to give you that bit of detail there. So 4 phases isn't wrong. I think 5 is more complete, and it reflects Bruce Tuckman's desire to make the model more robust and beneficial. And that it's also been borne out by the research. This stage, this adjourning phase, is often referred to by other terms as well, like outperforming, transitioning, or mourning. So by mourning, it might seem melodramatic, but teams can exist for any duration. And in the case of, I'll use an extreme case. In extreme cases, a team hasn't worked together before, a group of people. It was a very large team. They worked on some large, groundbreaking new product that revolutionized the company and really the space that they operate in. And it was a big success. And the project is over. And the team is, these folks had worked together very long hours, very closely together for many, many months, maybe even more than a year. Not that all projects have to run that long. I'm giving you sort of an extreme case here to paint the picture of why there can be sadness in some cases during the adjourning phase. And so what the team will often do is, even if it's not done by leadership or management, is amongst themselves, they'll sort of informally recognize their own efforts and talk to their peers outside the project about this great thing that was done with this endeavor that they worked on together diligently for however long they worked together. And again, the characteristic is disbanding. That's what adjourning is. The team is disbanding. Now, in the case of an agile project team, I can realize that in some cases, I'll give you an example that's sort of the opposite of the one I just gave you a moment ago in terms of the continuum of how long the team works together and that sort of thing. Let's say this is a team of 5 people and they work on web development projects almost exclusively. And believe me, there's a lot to be done there. So I can appreciate that. So they, and they're agile and they have a cadence, or they have a sprint duration, a cycle, if you will, of 2 weeks in terms of producing a potentially shippable product increment in it, which may or may not be launched every 2 weeks. So disbanding has a very different meaning in that case for that team, meaning they delivered what they were asked to deliver. The work for the next engagement will be different, but if the team members work together consistently, it's different from the example I gave earlier of 100 plus people. They never worked together before. They work diligently, the thing's over, and then they all go back to their prior assignments, right? But there still is a form of disbanding going on, even in agile environments, because the work changes. Okay, so here are the strategies for helping the team grow. And you'll notice that I don't have or advance on to the next phase because this is the last phase. But the strategies to help the team grow is really the strategies to help the team and organization grow. So this will make more sense in a moment, I hope, and I believe. So recognizing change is something that's quite important. It may be very obvious that change is going on, but it should be very clearly recognized that the team's efforts were successful and they have fulfilled the mission or the vision that was requested, and the team is disbanding, to be blunt. But things that can be done are providing an opportunity for team evaluations, also known as lessons learned, also known as project postmortem, also known as retrospective, and the list goes on. It really depends on the type of culture and the type of environment you have in your organization, but collecting that feedback. And I have 2 examples after this slide that I'd like to share with you that you might want to consider on the topic of lessons learned. Providing an opportunity also for individual acknowledgments. And then here we come on to my favorite one, which is the last one on purpose, because it's the last point in the phases of team development in the detail. It's celebrating the team's accomplishments. Some formal, I use that term, by formal I mean some sort of an organization recognized celebration. It can be a call out during a company-wide all hands meeting. It can be, just giving you a few examples. It can be a half-hour gathering during company hours where the example of this new groundbreaking product or service that was launched, that was a big success and groundbreaking and really helped the organization grow its business, hire more people and more jobs, and shake up and disrupt the marketplace that they're in a good way. So there's some sort of the company will have some sort of a party or a celebration usually during company hours. And then even when that happens, sometimes the team will get together after hours. So after party has many meanings. After party meaning, it's an additional party that can occur for the team that's just the team members that are celebrating it, which can be during business hours or outside business hours. After party in the sense of the work has been done and this is a party that's happening afterwards. There's just a lot of ways to read into the after party. Anyways, I really love that term and that's why it's here. So those are the strategies for helping the team grow. The kinds of questions that usually occur, if there is such a thing as standard questions, I'll say typical. The typical questions that occur during a retrospective or postmortem, post-project review, whatever you want to call it, are what went well, what didn't go well, and what are the opportunities for improvement? What are we going to do differently? Or flavors of those questions are very typical. And there's nothing wrong with those questions. But if you're in a company and you've been asked those questions many, many, many times, they can get a bit tiring and frankly boring. So what I have found is a couple of questions that really are the spirit of those, but the tone is quite different. So the first example is, this is an example of a question. This is something for you to consider if you haven't already done something like this, is this would be a question for the team to ask and answer. So here's the question. How can we, the team, make an even bigger positive impact on the organization? So when you're asking for what went right and what didn't go right, you're getting, a short list of some good things and some bad things. You'd be amazed at what you get by asking this question. It's certainly subject to interpretation for sure. But what you'll find is, well, we already talked about all the issues during our team, and they were tackled pretty well. But the one thing I'm just giving you an example here. The one thing that it's not a big deal, but if we had this to do over again, I think we should have had the updated version of the Microsoft toolset, not the 2-year-old version or something like that. I mean, you'd just be amazed. Those are kinds of things that don't rise to the level necessarily of big problems or big successes during the project. So it has a very different tone and feeling to it. So this is something you might want to ask either instead of or in addition to some of your standard questions. Here's another example. This is an example of a question also that the team should consider asking and answering. And here it is. How can we, the team, achieve even greater ease of work? The answer might be very similar to the earlier one, but these are really going to solicit very different answers than just asking what went right and what went wrong with the project. So things to consider. And so those are the highlights, the key highlights for the 5 phases of team development. What I want to mention now, as promised, is 1 or 2 examples, albeit rare, and underscore that 10 times, but albeit rare, that the direction of the flow, while normally left to right, going from forming, storming, norming, performing to adjourning, can sometimes go in the opposite direction. But I'll give you an example. But the good news is you have the diagnostic tools, which are the characteristics, and the strategies on how to get them back on track. So an example would be the team of 5 web development members has been working together for quite some time and are quite successful in all their endeavors for the company. But 2 out of the 5 people just moved to the London office, to work out of the London office. So the company just hired 2 new people to fill those spots. And what I should add is the team was at the performing stage. So you might see this coming, but what will happen is the team will, it's inevitable, and you know this by the behavior, right, of the characteristics, is the team is going to revert back to the forming stage. It's not done intentionally, this is what happens when you have shaken up the team by changing the folks that work together. So the time for the team to get back to the performing stage depends entirely on the 2 new people and the 3 existing people. So there's no specific, this takes a week or it takes a month. It really depends on the individual company culture and people involved. But that would be an example of how it's possible for, and there's other examples, but how it's possible for the direction to go from left to right instead of from right to left. But there's a way to solve that if it occurs. Here's some final words. Forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning are all necessary and inevitable for teams to grow and deliver results. This presentation introduced the 5 phases of team development, described the characteristics of each one, and provided, this is the most important part, the usable strategies for effectively navigating them from start to finish, which really helps fast track them for success. So moving through the phases, moving through them more quickly than if somebody didn't implement the strategies, for example. So if anyone's interested in learning more, I mean, again, if you Google any of these keywords, you'll certainly have an abundance of results, but here's some things that I would recommend taking a look at. If you're interested, I'm going to go through these slides very quickly. And I'm not going to list all the content, but there's 4 examples on that slide, 3 on that one, and 5 on that one for the bibliography. And again, the bibliography is the details for what I showed you earlier, such as Harvard Business Review, MIT, Inc. Magazine, etc. Those are all there. And now we're on to the takeaway. So I created a takeaway for attendees of this conference and this session in particular. And if you're interested, the high resolution PDF is available at bit.ly/aztake. I'll spell this out rather, bit.ly/az-take, T-A-K-E. So what I'd like to mention briefly is, I don't know about you, but I'm tired of forums, personal information in forums, and certainly tired of robots trying to check to make sure I'm not a robot, which is sort of CAPTCHA in a way. So by going to this URL, it'll take you directly to, it's obviously a short URL, but it'll ultimately, you'll land on the high resolution PDF. You don't need to give me any of your information. I would like to say up front that my social accounts for LinkedIn as well as Twitter are on the conference website, and I'd love to connect with you. So if you're interested as well, please do connect with me. And again, the links are on the conference website. But for this form, I wanted this to be as easy and as frictionless as possible. So you don't have to put in any information, or there's no caption, no nothing. It'll bring you to this. And the other thing I want to mention is, if you do decide to Google Bruce Tuckman or the 5 faces or any of the other keywords, you may possibly come up with some stuff I've produced that's related to this presentation over the years. However, this visual that's in your takeaway and that was presented today was created for this presentation. It is updated. It's everything else that's out there on the other platforms, such as Twitter and LinkedIn, that I've published, are a year plus old. This is updated, it's been refreshed, and it's high resolution. And this is for you if you're interested. So I produced that for you as a takeaway. So use the proven strategies to help your teams go farther, faster. And we're on to the Q&A and thank you. I'll start with the thank yous. And the first thank you is for you. Thank you to you for attending the conference and the session. I appreciate it. Thank you to the volunteer conference organizers, and thank you to Microsoft for sponsoring the event. Without you, the organizers, and Microsoft, this event wouldn't be possible. So I appreciate it very much. And this is my last slide. Thank you, everybody. Here's my Twitter handle directly here. Again, Twitter as well as LinkedIn is on my profile on that conference website, so it's there as well. Also, if you decide later to get the takeaway, but maybe you forgot the URL, you can always contact me through Twitter or through LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to give you that short URL for the direct access to that high resolution PDF. So I know I went through that slide quickly, but if you don't remember the URL or you want to get to it later, that's what you can do. And at this point, what I'm going to do is, as I mentioned earlier, is I'm going to probably pause the audio and video and then focus in on the chat. So I'm going to leave this slide up for just a little while and then get into chat, look and see what questions you have in our remaining time and start answering them. Thank you very much.